Welcome, everyone, to Rock M Radio. This is the beginning of a brand new episode of Dive Cuts. As you'll see here, it's me, Sam Snelling, all alone. I won't be for long, but we are sans Matthew Harris tonight. He is celebrating his anniversary with his wife, like a good husband should. And he'll be back next week as we sort of expand into our in-season coverage. But I am going to bring on Blake Lovell because every year we've done this now 3, 4, or 5 years in a row. Who knows how many? We talk to Blake right before the season starts. We go through all the SEC teams and we get into the nitty gritty of what this season is going to look like. So without any more talk here, let's talk to Blake Lovell. And I would like to welcome into the Rock M Radio Dive Cuts podcast a friend, longtime friend of our little pod here. A lot of Mizzou fans' favorite Southeast Conference basketball writer for his love of Dennis Gates, unabashed love. Our good friend Blake Lovell. Blake, how are you doing, man?
You know, I'm doing well, my friend. And yes, when Dennis talks, I listen. That's how I think it should work, and it has worked to this point. So I am well, and it's always this is when basketball season officially starts, is when you and I have this conversation each preseason. And so anyone out there listening, if you were wondering, has the season started yet? It starts now.
Yeah, it is. Over the weekend, there was actual college basketball games on. I don't know how much you caught of any of, Arkansas and Purdue and Tennessee and Tennessee played Michigan State and Illinois and KU played. So, Missouri fans got, if they wanted to, they got, to see quite a few of their rivals live and on TV and before the season officially starts. And I don't know, did you watch any of those games over the weekend?
I saw bits and pieces of the Arkansas and Tennessee games. I didn't get a chance to see much of anything else because, also doing football stuff, as we know. And so, yeah, but I did see bits and pieces of those. I mean, I think there are certain things you can take away, other things it's just they're rolling out everybody and working with different rotations, as we know, and those kind of things. But, I mean, I thought seeing some of the new guys, specifically for Tennessee and Arkansas, was interesting. Whether it was a Dalton Connect, who I wasn't sure exactly what role he played for Tennessee this year, knew he'd be a factor, but, the one highlight play I'm sure everyone's seen. That'll wow you a little bit.
Tennessee in transition.
Yeah. Hey. How about that? That was the biggest thing. It's like, wait a second, who's he playing for? Is this Tennessee? Yeah. But, they didn't have Vescovy, of course, and Ziegler's still out. We know that, but yeah, I thought there were some things from there. And then Arkansas, I mean, hey, I think Arkansas was about what I expected. They
looked
deep.
A lot like an Arkansas team, didn't they?
Yeah.
Shockingly, every Arkansas team over the last, 3, 4 years, they looked a lot like those teams.
Yeah, it was very similar. And I think the only thing you usually look at is minutes distribution and those kind of things. For example, in Arkansas, Chandler Lawson playing 30 something minutes. I don't know that I thought that was going to happen right away.
I would not have picked that.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe that's an exhibition thing. Maybe it's something. I tend to think it's a little something. But then you have the things that you fully expected, like a Tremont Mark looking like, that guy for them in terms of exactly what they needed, coming over from Houston. And so I made certain
Battle also kind of, making some big shots, and
Battle did some good things. Again, I don't look, I can go ahead and spoil it now if you want me to. Most people know if they've looked at my stuff in the off season, those are the two teams I've had at the top. Pretty much all off season. I don't really see much of a need to change that. But there are a couple other teams that I think you could put in that mix, which I'm sure we'll discuss. So
we are going to discuss the forthcoming college basketball season. I think in the past, people that are longtime listeners, this would be, I guess, our first real preseason one that we've done via YouTube as well. So I'm not sure we have any longtime viewers. It's been since, I think, March since we started doing this. But yeah, so I think people that know, we would kind of go through team by team and discuss like each team's kind of pros and cons. You and I discussed before the podcast, we're not going to do that this time. You'll notice Matt Harris is not here. Matt, it is October 30th. He got married on October 30th a few years ago. So, these guys in their October anniversaries, needing time off. That definitely wasn't me a couple weeks ago. But you can tell that we are like basketball focused. We got to get that wedding in before the basketball season ramps up. So
of course,
yeah, everyone else is all worried about, if you get married on a Saturday in the fall, it's like, oh, it's college football. I'm like, nope, just got to get it out of the way before college basketball starts. But yeah, so we aren't going to go team by team. We're going to kind of talk in generalities for teams that I think everybody sort of looks at towards the bottom of the league. We'll kind of hammer some of the middle. Get into who we think are maybe some favorites, some people that can contend for the league title, but also, possibly like a Final Four or a national championship. And then we'll kind of get into some national storylines and some things to maybe kind of watch out for. So without any further ado, let's get into it. What do you say?
I say let's do it.
So the bottom of the conference seems to be pretty consistent across the board through your picks, through my picks, through the Matt's picks. Everybody pretty much looks at South Carolina as being the worst team, or most likely to be the worst thing. It's interesting, though, at least, that South Carolina finished like 12th last year, despite being the worst team in the Ken Pomeroy ratings. So, are we certain that South Carolina is going to finish in the basement, or who do you think, if they're the odds-on favorite, like who's got the second best odds to finish 14th?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I even wonder, and I've looked at it a couple times, and I haven't spent my entire offseason on South Carolina, but I think they may have a better roster this year than they had last year. They've added a Miles Studi, they've added a BJ Mack, Talon Cooper, those guys, and I think those are pretty good players. I know they've added some other guys as well, but I guess Stephen Clark, I think, was from Citadel, big guy. So I still, it's like you got to go on the roster, right? And I look at their roster and I look at the other team's rosters, and I just think it's the 14th on paper. But, they also won at Rupp or whatever last year. And I think Lamont Paris is a fine coach. Like, I really don't think this is him. I just thought he was taking over from behind, much further behind than everybody else, I think, just kind of given where the roster was at the time. And
that is kind of part of it, is like, what time are you hired? The that setup, and I still think they probably should have, kept Frank Martin. He was, he wasn't winning big, but he was still kind of winning. And I think you try to maybe pick a time where you can know that your guy coming in that you can hire is maybe an upgrade. And I'm just not sure like Lamont Paris is an upgrade. I think that's part of the deal. Like, it is a tough league. It is a lot of really good coaches. You have in your picks, at least. And so these are, everyone may be aware, may not be aware. I always send out a game by game pick 'em and then send the standings over to everybody after they've gone through and picked. Blake's picks had LSU 13th. I have LSU 11th. I have Georgia 13th, Vanderbilt 12th, LSU 11th. You have Georgia 11, Vandy 12, then LSU and Carolina. I was a little surprised Matt Norlander actually picked, I think, Georgia 6th ahead of Arkansas.
Wow.
That's some belief in Mike White that I just don't think I have.
No, I mean, I'm a Mike White guy, but I think that's high. I think it's the same with them. I think their overall roster is better this year than last year. But like you said, in my picks, I had LSU 13, Vandy 12. I don't know though. I think Georgia I would keep higher than LSU. Even though I think LSU adding Jordan Wright, Cook. Has Jalen Cook gotten the waiver yet? Isn't it crazy that we're having this conversation at the end of October and there are certain guys that we just don't know if they're going to play yet?
Like the week officially, or the season officially starts in a week, and we don't have an answer on potentially LSU starting point guard, potentially Ole Miss's starting wing, and Brandon Murray, Musa Cisse, potentially they're starting center. Who else? There's got to be others.
Yeah, I mean, there's what is it? Kentucky? What's it? The big guy? I can't pronounce his name. I'm just gonna say it right now.
Oh yeah. Yeah. This.
We'll get to that in a second, but
yeah, we don't have to talk about Kentucky yet.
No, we'll get to them. But like that's my point. Is like how is this? That's a discussion for another day. But anyways, I think Georgia. Yes, if of these four teams, here's the question, right? Like if we both had to make the answer, and maybe it is as simple as the team we put our ranking ahead of at the top of these four teams, but I do tend to think Georgia may be the team that is kind of that. I don't want to say they're the Missouri because I don't think they have the top 5 for ceiling or something like that Missouri got to last year. I just don't see that happening, even though, like you said, somebody could pick them that high, but. Yeah, I think it's still Georgia. I just think the roster is better. And I mean, we saw how quickly he turned things around last year, and it's like, well, turn things around. The only ones, but remember where they were the year before. And so if you take it at that, then I think, there's reason to be optimistic because I do think he's done a good job with the roster. But like with LSU,
I still think like they're probably a year or two away. Because I do actually like that he pivoted kind of hard to getting a younger team in there and having some talented freshmen can and kind of throwing them to the wolves is a good way to kind of kickstart your rebuild. Is it may be rough in that year, but those guys get a lot of experience and freshmen become sophomores, right?
Yeah, and I mean, look, with Vanderbilt, I'm tired of sleeping on Vanderbilt. Like I've been guilty of it, but it's just. I mean, you start with a 1-2 that could challenge a lot of 1-2s, in the league, and Emmanuel and Tyron Lawrence. If those two guys stay on the trajectory they were on last year, they're going to be tough. But I don't know if the depth overall is there. But you know what? That's always been a thing. I think with some of these teams is they haven't been the deepest, but Stackhouse gets the most out of the guys, and I said that from the start. And we've talked about him in terms of underrated. I think is just a basketball coach. But like he got the most out of those guys last year. They didn't start great, but he got the most out of them down the stretch. Now I think no Liam Robbins, no Jordan Wright. I mean, those were two big pieces of the puzzle last year in terms of making that push that they made. And so that's a little different. You got to rely on some of these new guys. I think Colin Smith is going to have a big year, kind of a breakout season as a sophomore. But it's wait and see on a lot of other guys that they brought in. But they've done a pretty good job of getting the most out of the guys that they have brought in before. So I think you can be optimistic about Vanderbilt. But yeah, I'm intrigued by the bottom 4 as they're projected going into the season. Because I do think quite a few of the rosters could be better than they were a year ago. But it's just I can't put them ahead of the other 10 teams that are in front of them. So
yeah, and I think like that's a little bit of the tough thing, and when you fill out like a game by game prediction, like it actually because of the unbalanced schedule in the SEC, it does weight things in different ways, and like for example, like South Carolina was I think 221st in KenPom last year. Like they could improve 150 spots and still be 4-14 just based upon who they play. Like it is tough if you get, Tennessee twice, if you get Arkansas twice, if you're a team that it doesn't score the ball well, and you go up against good defensive teams, it's going to make life hard. And there are a lot of really good defensive teams in the SEC. I do want to bring up, there's always like one surprise pick when I initially kind of go through my selections, and
I know where we're going with this one.
You have Alabama 10th. And I have them 5th. However, I only have them at 10-8. You have them at 7-11. I think we're kind of seeing the same thing, though. Like anybody who's kind of paid attention to some of the secret scrimmage scores that have kind of been tweeted out by any number of like college basketball tweeters, you'll notice that Wake Forest, I think, beat Alabama in a secret scrimmage. And there were a lot of points scored. And one of the things that I think I was most concerned about with this Alabama team is their ability to defend. When Nate Oates has a team that defends well, they're really good. And when he doesn't, they're pretty average. Because there are games where you just can't outscore your opponent. And I think that he may have a team like that this year.
So Alabama fans, before you start tweeting at me, I would not pick Alabama 10th. Okay. I'm just saying, like, we are actually going to release our preseason rankings, I think either Tuesday or Wednesday on Southeastern 14. And I do not have Alabama 10th, just for the record. But yes, when I went through Sam's game by game picks and made my choices for every game, somehow they wound up there. And that's it. Like, it's the defense. And maybe you caught me on a day where I was really down on them defensively. I'm just like, you know what? They're not winning that game. They're not winning that game. But since that, remember, I filled this out 1st of September, I guess, somewhere in there. Since then, looking at this team more, they've been one of the teams I probably looked at the most this offseason, just to try to get a grasp on what they are going to be, because there are just so many different pieces in different spots than what they were last year. Yes, it goes back to the defensive thing. You said it. Like, it is, his best teams have been elite defensive teams, not good defensive teams, elite defensive teams.
Yeah, like,
and on
top
paper,
5, good.
Yes, on paper, I don't see this team as an elite defensive team. I think you could even question if they're a great defensive team. Maybe good, but I don't know that they are elite just looking at them as it stands right now, which again means nothing at this very moment until we actually see them out there in real games and against real competition. And so, yeah, I mean, I think this is one where the front court is Grant Nelson, we know, but he's more offense to me than defensive guy that's going to come in and stop everybody. Now, I know he was 3rd in the league in block shots, all that, but I mean, even Oates himself has said, on-ball defense needs to get better. The physicality, I think, of the SEC is always something we talk about when there's a guy that comes in that's transferring up. It's something you got to add to the equation. A Jaron Stevenson, there's a lot of praise on him going into the season. And, still, though, I look at it as a kid who reclassified from 2024. Great rim protector. I think he can get there. But, again, think about what you're trying to replace. You're trying to replace a Noah Clowney. You're trying to replace a Bediako, a Brandon Miller. That's the thing I've said all offseason. If this team just had Charles Bediako, I'd be all in, probably.
Yeah.
But they don't. And so, and I don't see anyone else on the roster that is him. And you can say, well, maybe Stevenson's the best equipped to do that. Or maybe you think it's Nelson. I mean, they're different players offensively, of course. But, yeah, I mean, I want to see how the front court develops before I'm there. And I think you can even say the same with the backcourt. I mean, Aaron Estrada, Latrell Wrightsell, good players, but they're up transfers too, and I think it's worth just seeing shooting wise. What does this team look like from a shooting standpoint?
I don't know. Possibly asking a guy like Mark Sears to, step up his usage, which, is again, like, I think having him off the ball last year and being a little bit more of a spacer is probably a better fit for him. And I think when he was asked to sort of, break guys down off the dribble, he could struggle at times.
Yeah. I moved Alabama up to 5th. I'll just go ahead and spoil it if you're like, I have them 5th going into the season. I know.
Well, see, now we're in agreement, so I can't, pick too many bones with you. Well, but again, that does sort of, lead us into like this weird soft middle. And I think it's at least worth, kind of bringing up, like, I mentioned that you had them at 7-11. I have them at 10-8. Like, that's really like a a 3-game swing, and so much of the middle of the SEC is determined by 1 or 2 games that just sort of go your way. Last year Missouri is a great example. Dree Golston throws in a 35-footer at the buzzer at Tennessee. Suddenly Tennessee is 11-7 in the league, and so is Missouri. Missouri now has that tiebreaker, and it's just like if Dree Golston doesn't make that shot, then Tennessee they look more like I think what a lot of people probably expected, even with like the Vanderbilt loss and even with some of the ugly offense that they had to endure. But it is just sort of like indicative of how you go from maybe being 10th to being 5th. And I think like that's, to me, is any of these teams that we're about to talk about are all teams that they just need like 1 or 2 results to go their way. And suddenly, like they're making us look bad by winning a couple more games, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can like you said, the 4 teams, 5 teams, whatever in this kind of range, I can make the argument as to why they could finish ahead of an Alabama. Unlikely that all of them do, but I could make an argument for each of them as to why they could finish ahead of an Alabama. And so, like you said, that's where like just the swing in those kind of games, when you just compare some of these teams, like Auburn, Mississippi State, Florida, Missouri, Ole Miss is interesting, depending on who's on the floor. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I don't know what's going to separate some of these teams. Maybe as simple as, obviously, with Mississippi State, an injury. I mean, the most significant injury probably in the SEC going into the season until Lou Smith, and when he returns. For an Ole Miss, can you get either guy, a waiver, whether it's Murray or Cisse, based on what I've heard last week? I just don't see it. And so I don't think there's a lot of optimism there. And so if that's the case, then I think your expectations on Ole Miss go down a bit, although I still think they'll be better just because I think Chris Beard will work his magic like he has at every other stop in terms of the on-court product. And so, so these are the teams that are just kind of bunched together. And, again, I think it's, in one instance, I could say, sure, I'm going to put Alabama ahead of all these teams. But these are all, I keep using Missouri as an example. Like, these are, to me, there's a lot in this group these are your Missouri-like teams from last year that could just take off and kind of leave everybody else behind. So,
well, so just kind of looking at that middle, teams that maybe have a shot at getting as high as like a 4, but not really a team that you envision, potentially winning the league. And I think like that I always sort of look at like our groups in tiers, right? And I think that there are probably maybe 5 teams, if you want to include Alabama, who potentially have a shot, at least on paper, to be a league champion at the end of the year. Their roster looks good enough. They've got the coaching, the schedule lines up to where they can get to 14-4, 15-3, or 16-2 if things kind of go their way. And then you have this like next middle, which to me is like where I kind of see Missouri, a team that's probably not going to contend for a league title, but like last year, if things kind of go their way, they could possibly get into like a 4 seed. But they could also like have a few of those results go against them, and suddenly they're a 10 seed. I've personally got in that group Missouri, Mississippi State, Florida, Auburn, and Ole Miss.
Yep.
I think all those teams are fairly even. They've all got different strengths. They've all got different weaknesses. With Auburn, I just don't really love what they've done in this past offseason. I love Janai Broome. I think he's a great player. But it does feel like the roster isn't at the same level that it's been in previous years.
Yeah, I just think it's always, to me, we look at this team and we think they're going to shoot it better. I still want to see it.
And then they don't.
I think, yeah. And I mean, that's the thing, is like, I I think they've got some good pieces, like you said. You can certainly build a lot around Broome and Jalen Williams, and their front court's not an issue at all. But like, it is going to be interesting to see what the backcourt looks like, because there's a lot of Holloway come in and be a star. I mean, there's a lot of people who think that's going to happen right away, and they need him to. I mean, they need him to be able to shoot the ball. And Denver Jones comes in a bulk scorer in a high tempo offense at FIU, and so maybe he comes and fits right into the way Bruce Pearl wants to play. But yeah, like, still overall depth, I don't know. That's where I think you're leaning on Chad Baker-Mazar and those kind of guys to be good off the bat, which I think they can be. But yeah, I think with Auburn, I don't know if there's enough that just convinces you that they have to be the team that's ahead of the others. Because I think, again, to me, it's going to depend on the shooting and see if they can shoot it better. If they can't, then yeah, I mean, they could wind up being kind of right there with these other teams, and not much really separates them into possibly being a top, 3 team. They can't get that push that they need to get there. I mean, if Tolu Smith was healthy to start the season, I'd pick Mississippi State as a team probably that I would say they're going to crack that top 4 somehow, some way. And a lot of that's just the belief I have in Chris Jans. I mean, I think he's kind of proven that, look, they were, again, this is not like, we're not overplaying this. They were the worst shooting team in the country last season, period. Like, there was no one that shot the ball worse from 3 than Mississippi State. But yet they still got to the NCAA tournament. They were still one of the best defensive teams out there. Their offense was ugly, but they still found a way to get there. And, they found what worked for them. They're going to really have to do that now, I think, even though, I mean, they got a lot of guys back and they bring in some talented players, but taking Smith off the floor, that's different. Like, it's just a different dynamic. And so I don't know. I'm curious to see if they can still kind of stay on that same trajectory. And look, we're talking about that. He should be back. What they say, hopefully, I think the hopeful was the term, to start middle of conference play, something like that. So if he is, then they can be fine.
But I don't know. Any foot injuries on big guys, have to make you nervous. Like, because, and they haven't really gone beyond like what the foot injury is. Yeah. But that's a tough thing, and for him to be out that much time and not around the sport, it does sort of make you wonder how quickly he'll be able to kind of acclimate himself and back into the flow. And then you also have to factor in, like, there's a team that's going to learn to play without him for several months. And how is that team going to look without him? And then how are they going to respond once he's back? I think, some of the continuity that they have probably helps. But it is one of those things where I think there's an assumption that they'll be better offensively. And I don't know how you get there when you're bringing back all the same guys who have never been good offensive players. Like, DJ Jeffries shot well as a freshman. It's been downhill since. And so like all these things are enough for me to, I think, be a little hesitant. I still think they're probably a tournament team, but I think it's going to be a lot like last year where they're sort of squeezing in to one of the last few at-large spots.
Yeah. Like I said, I would have been much higher on them probably entering the season if he was ready to go. Because they got a brutal SEC slate too. I think I was looking at it. They open at they open at South Carolina. Then they got a stretch where they played Tennessee, Alabama, Kentucky, Florida, Auburn, Alabama again, Ole Miss on the road. Like, it's a pretty brutal opening start of the schedule. And so, like you said, you get off on the wrong foot there. It's just not easy to regroup in this league. Yeah, well, there you go. So, I mean, but then I say that, right? Think about it. It's a team that started, what were they, 1-7 in the league last year, got to the NCAA tournament. So you can say that, but they still managed to do it. But it's just different this year, I think, if he's not playing for a while.
Well, they also had a win over Marquette, which aged beautifully.
Yes, sure.
So that's another thing that sort of helped them sort of squeeze in.
Yeah.
What does Florida need to do? What do they like? Does Riley Kugel need to be a star for Florida because it really feels to me that anyone who's like been covering college basketball long enough, we all just assume that Florida's going to be good, but they haven't been good for a while. Like, they've been okay. I think Mike White's second year was the last time that Florida actually had a good team. Every other year they've been pretty disappointing, including last year.
I was going to say, I think, I talked to anybody on the staff, but I would believe that they were disappointed with last year because I think we all thought it'd be much better. And it wasn't like there were times where they weren't good. And
even with Colin Castleton. Yeah.
I was going to say, they obviously didn't have him down the stretch, but even when he was on the floor at times, they weren't great. And I look at this team and I do think maybe they're the team in terms of when initially you said if you had to pick one of these teams that cracks the top four, Florida was the first team that came to mind. And I think it's because, yes, Riley Kugler is a star. Like he is, I think he's a star. But it's Will Richard is there, right? They brought in Walter Clayton. They brought in Zion Pullen. Like those four guys just alone, I mean, that's great. That's a lot of good stuff in there. And I think what is most important is it feels like those four guys have skill sets that complement each other. And I think when I look at just that group alone, now you're talking about a lot of guys who are going to play on the perimeter. Where's the rest of it, right? And therein lies the question for me. Now, this is where, of course, an EJ Jarvis.
Are you not a believer in Micah Handlogton?
Again, when we talk about guys who are transferring up and being put in the spot to where essentially, and I'm not saying Florida's doing this, but you're being asked to be the next Colin Castleton, basically.
Yeah.
And nothing against Handlogton, but I just don't think that's going to happen right away. Sure, he's 7'1", Sun Belt Freshman of the Year. Obviously, blocks a lot of shots.
Great prospect. Like he looks like the kind of guy that and maybe it's a little bit rough next year, but maybe he defers a little bit more to like Tyrese Samuel. But I really thought when Jarvis, the Yale transfer, sort of announced his retirement from basketball, like I thought that really, really hurt their interior because I thought he was going to be a guy who was going to help them.
That's where we talked about. I mean, it's just if you added him to this team, like I'd be all in on Florida because you mentioned Tyrese Samuel. I think he was made for the SEC. Like I just think Big East guy comes over, not afraid to be physical. In a league like this where we know that's what it's all about when things get into the paint there's a lot of physicality, playing at Seton Hall. I think to me, he's going to be fine. I'd be surprised if he's not, someone that's obviously a significant part of the rotation. He has to be from day one, but I think that's where Handlogton, how quickly he develops into, a potential star. Maybe it's not this year, next year, but they're going to ask a lot of him, I think, off the bat. And Thomas Howe, I'm not sure if I say his name right, but he's someone else. I know he's been injured, but 7-foot wingspan. I think there may be some high expectations for him to try to be in the mix too. But it's just if you take Jarvis, you put him on this roster. It's not even saying that guy's gonna have to average 15 and 10 or anything. It's just having another guy in the front court would be huge, and that's where I just wonder from a depth standpoint. I don't know. It remains to be seen. But look, 1 through 4, just with all those guys potentially backcourt, on the wing, whatever. I like all those guys, and so we'll see. But I still think there's a lot of upside for this Florida team. But I do think there's a lot more size too. If you look at it, like overall, this team has a lot more size on the roster. I think they can compete near the top, but I want to see how the front court pans out.
Yeah, they have a lot of post players. We don't yet know the quality, maybe outside of Samuel. I think we can give Samuel credit. Yeah. I think, Handlogton's a guy we liked in the portal. The Mats that do a lot of the basketball content with me. I mean, we were all big fans of, after you watch the film, and he just looks like a guy that is going to fit well eventually. Like there may be a curve, but so then, I think we naturally come to Missouri, and obviously, you're a big Dennis Gates fan. I think Missouri fans have, if they weren't on board initially at the hire, have been completely, turned around on that. He's been everything and more that you could ask for as far as turning things around last year, building a product that was a lot of fun to watch. And then the way that he's recruited this last offseason, I think there's a lot of people that are very hopeful that Missouri will be able to kind of surprise. I know the analytics again are kind of down, on Missouri. Some of that stems from the fact that they were so poor on defense last year.
Yeah.
But this is a roster that you're bringing in some guys who are not coming up from the Horizon League and maybe a little bit better defenders, better rebounders. And if Missouri is able to score the ball as well as they did last year or close to it, and defend better and rebound better, then this is a team that should have every expectation that they can sort of reach the same heights that they did last year.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the thing I've said is like, hey, is there a Kobe Brown on the roster? Is there a Des Moines Hodge on the roster? Maybe not, but I think overall the roster is deeper in terms of the options that they have to work with. And I always love is this team going to have some deficiencies in certain areas? Probably. Like, are they going to be as glaring maybe as the defense or the rebounding last year? I don't know. But even if they are, like, I love the quote, Gates, I don't know if you saw it in the Almanac. It was, would you rather win 25 games or win the rebounding battle? And it's like, yeah, well, give me the 25. I don't care about the rebounding battle if I get the 25 wins, right? So
yeah,
who cares about that? But, also the stat from there, which I know you guys talked about last year. You and I have talked about this before with other teams, but it's like what was it? 7-0, 8-0 in games, 5 points or less. Is some of that going to come back to the middle? Sure. Like it's hard to keep that going. And
there is no Dree Golston to hit 2 buzzer beaters this year.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So that may not be in your favor in every game, but yes, like I'm obviously a Dennis Gates guy. I think I've just seen, one of his best qualities is building a roster. Like that's been the case from the start for him. That's why he had the success he had at Cleveland State. And sure, it's easy to say, well, yeah, but it's Cleveland State. And then, of course, we saw what happened last year. And so now I think you have no choice but to just give him the benefit of the doubt in that somehow, some way, they put together a roster and they had their reasons for it. Like they had reasons for bringing certain guys in to fit areas that they feel like, they have to replace from last year, whether it is the exit of, Golston and Brown and Hodge and so forth. But it's also just connecting the pieces together on this particular roster and just how guys are going to fit. And I think it's great because you can start with a Nick Honor who, that's your starting point. Like that's the guy that he's the one that's going to make everybody, kind of go and put them in the right position and play off of what he can do handling the ball, which we know, the assist to turnover ratio and all that last year was tremendous. And so to me, this is all about, it's very simple, right? It's, Noah Carter. How does his game continue to evolve? Obviously, he's going to have to rebound more this year. That's something that he's just going to have to, just based on Kobe Brown not being there and so forth. But it's the transfers, whether it's Tajay, Bates, Grill, Vanover, it's those guys. Like who? I ain't gonna say like who's the next Des Moines Hodge, but maybe like who is the guy that like just maybe by the end of the season is completely not necessarily taking over games, but he's the guy that every time you need a big play, all of a sudden you look around and it's that guy doing it. Yeah, is it going to be any of that? It's probably one of those guys. I don't know who it's going to be, but my guess is it's one of those 4. And Vanover's a different player than Hodge, but the same type of stuff we're talking about in terms of just impacting a game. And then it's, some of the other guys too that, it's how Sean East develops. It's how Aiden Shaw develops. It's how, I don't know if you guys talked about it. I just hadn't had a chance to look at a lot of stuff here recently, but it's like, Gates has talked all about Caleb Brown, right? And I
don't think we're buying into the offseason talk as much on that one.
Yeah.
I would just say I'm going to wait until Dennis Gates started actually, playing Caleb Brown a lot of minutes before I believe that, a guy who couldn't get off the bench at all last year is suddenly, capable of being in the rotation. So I'll be skeptical on that.
Well, there's a lot around it too. It's like it's hard to find minutes on this roster. Like it's just So
he did a good job of building out of depth, which they needed. They needed more bodies because I think he still wants to play the same way, which is more of a pressing style and defensive focused. And you could see them kind of wear down at times last year, because of that, that pressure. And, towards the end of the year, he was really only playing 7, maybe 8 guys, the bulk of the minutes. And to play that style, I think you need probably 9 or 10. I mean, maybe Caleb Brown gets into there. I'd be skeptical because I think when you're looking at the guard rotation, I feel like it's pretty deep. Like, he's not a point guard, so he's not going to take those minutes. Is he going to beat out John Tonje? Is he going to beat out Caleb Grill? Tamar Bates? I don't know.
It's going to be hard. Yeah, like I said, I think it's just. I mean, but it is, right? It's, you think about
where do you have Missouri?
Where did I wind up putting them? Well, I think I actually moved them ahead of Ole Miss just because initially I was pretty high on Ole Miss, but without knowing, and I don't think the 2 guys we mentioned earlier are going to get the waivers, so I would put them ahead of Ole Miss still. So I think I wound up putting Missouri. I've either put them 7th or 8th. I don't remember if I put.
With your picks, you have them 7th, but I mean, granted, that's a tie. I never do tiebreakers on your picks. Yeah. It's too hard to figure those out.
So I think what I did
Ole
was
Miss, Florida, and Missouri were all tied at 8 and 10 with your picks.
So Ole Miss, I moved down. I know I did in my rankings. I don't know why I can't find them. I'm looking on my screen here. I think what I did was trying to figure out what to do with Mississippi State. And I think I was trying to figure out whether I wanted to move them below Missouri because, again, I just think the Toulouse Smith injury, it's huge, and I don't know what to do with them. So, my rankings are sort of I don't know where to put Mississippi State. So I think I'll wind up having Missouri 7th or 8th, most likely. So,
what is their ceiling for you?
I mean, probably a 5th, I'd say. Because the reason I say that is kind of we just kind of drew the line with the other teams that you kind of bunch in the same category, right? And if you do that, I think it's going to be hard to eclipse the top 4. I will be very surprised, although injuries happen, all those things, but I feel pretty good about the top 4 in terms of, and I feel like we say this all the time, but then you have a Missouri who, jumped in the mix last year and A&M all of a sudden just goes wild.
Yeah, I think that's sort of where, and we can kind of pivot to, the top, teams here. But, there's always one team who seems to just sort of surprise everybody and jump up in there. Last year, maybe 2 with A&M and Missouri. I don't think anybody expected A&M to go on quite the run that they did. Especially coming off what was it? They're 6-5 coming out of non-con.
Yeah, they were getting blown out by people too. Not good teams. Yeah,
just looking horrible. But I think everybody sort of looks at Tennessee, Arkansas, Texas A&M, Kentucky as being the top 4. If you like Kentucky, you're a believer in talent. I think, and arguably probably the roster with the most NBA players is on the Wildcats. There's a lot of youth. Texas A&M. I have Texas A&M first. For anybody who's watching this before the order is revealed, that preview will be going up on Thursday. But yeah, so I have Texas A&M first because I just, they won the most league games and are bringing everybody back. They won fewer league games than Alabama did, but Alabama's not returning what Texas A&M is. So I'm giving the benefit of the doubt to that. Tennessee, things got, a little bumpy for them last year. They're going to be great defensively. Is the offense going to be good enough? And then Arkansas, Musselman had 4 pros on his roster last year, and guys who were drafted, and they were 8 and 10 in the league. I realize this roster seems more curtailed to what he has had success with in the past. but I don't think it's outlandish. And I was listening to Matt Norlander and Gary Parrish, their podcast, and Norlander was taking heat because he had Arkansas 8th, and I think that's crazy. Like, I realistically think at worst they're probably a top 5 roster. But he had a good point. Like, they were 8-10 last year. Yeah, they made the NCAA tournament. They had some injuries. There's not as many pros on this roster as there was last year. If you are a believer in talent, like, if those guys were that talented, they'd be in the NBA. I mean, Tremont Mark's a good college player. Khalif Battle's a good college player. I could see an argument for them kind of falling out of that top group.
So I think the difference for me is, and you kind of just said it, and that it's going to sound wild, but I think the difference is that they brought in good college players. Like, it's not even just a talent thing. Like, I think it's they're the oldest roster in the SEC entering the season. And I think that's such a difference in where they were last year, both just from an overall age standpoint and I think just an overall maturity standpoint, of having guys who have played a lot of minutes in college basketball. And I think, to me, Mark is the guy that I feel like is going to be the one that holds everything together, outside of an obvious Devo Davis returning for, his 8th season and played 600 games in the league, I feel like, at this point. But I think Mark is the guy that we talked about. If you take guys off of rosters, if you took Tremont Mark off of this roster, I'd be a little more down on him. But I think he brings all the things that they need on this particular team. And again, I try not to overreact to the exhibition, but I thought Khalif Battle looked good. I thought that, he's someone that I'm a little more confident in. I think you and I don't remember if we talked, I think we may have talked about this before we started recording, but a Chandler Lawson playing 30-something minutes, I didn't see that happening. Right. And so I think this team being more experienced, I'm going to hesitate to say this because I always say this with SEC teams, and yet the league still winds up being one of the worst 5 shooting leagues in the country pretty much every year. But I think Arkansas is going to shoot the ball much better. They shot 31% last year, which, again, for the SEC, that's about even, middle of the pack probably.
Well, really, that's why Missouri had so much success last year, is because they could actually score the ball. And in a league where nobody can score, you can win 11 games if you can simply score, even if you let the other team score a lot.
Well, and I say all that to lead to the main event. And I know Missouri fans don't love to hear it, but like, not having Brazil, if you put him on the team last year for the entire season, I think it changes considerably in terms of where they are November to mid-January. Whereas, where they would start at 1-5. I think he's the guy. Like, to me, they didn't have another guy like that. They didn't have a big man that could step out and make shots. They didn't have a big man who could do the things he could do. And I think it just limited him, among other things, whether it's just the efficiency from an Anthony Black and guys like that. But I think this is a more well-rounded team. And I think for me, that's going to be the difference. It's an older, more experienced, well-rounded team versus just a bunch of guys who have talent. And I just don't think the chemistry ever came together last year. And I think the chemistry on this team, sure, you can always ask the question. We ask it about Kentucky every year. You ask it a lot of other teams now in the transfer portal era. You never know if the chemistry always comes together. But this may be the deepest team he's had there. I think definitely one of the most oldest teams he's had there. So that's why I would give Arkansas. It is a deep team,
but he's also a guy who traditionally does not play a lot of players.
True.
And even against Purdue,
yep.
He didn't play a lot of guys.
Yep.
Like it was a rotation of about 7.
Well,
I think it's a fascinating thing, and I do think that I at this point I think you trust Muss. Last season I think is probably more an aberration than what we can expect for his teams. They've otherwise been terrific. I do think that Matt Norlander's rankings for Arkansas being that low is Like I don't have them ranked that low. I have them fourth. I do think that there's, some questions that they have to answer. And if they can figure out how to score the ball with consistency, like Arkansas will probably win the league.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I mean, I just think having the options they have is as good a starting point as anybody else. Because they got a lot of them, like you said, even if they don't wind up playing. I mean, it's inevitable. Some of these guys won't play as much as we think they may. And that's just how it works when you bring in this many new guys. So,
and I also think like there might have been some I really want to win this game going on there from us. So of the so let's just bring up Kentucky a little bit. Because this feels like way more of a traditional Cal roster in that he's going in big with freshmen. They are wildly talented. I think like 4 top 25 stars, including like 3 of those guys in the top 6. Yeah. I think this so Zvonimir Ivisic, I believe is how you say his name, 7'2" freshman from Croatia. Sorry, I was actually just recently writing the Tennessee preview and writing about the big Serb who was throwing elbows for the Vols last year, Uros Plavsic. So Zvonimir Ivisic is probably a guy who would have been top 25 if he was not an international kid. Another sort of like 5-star level player. So that's probably 5 dudes who should see their name called on draft day at some point. Whether, it's a one and done type deal or not. I just think like it's a gamble because like Calipari is sticking with what he knows. He tried what everybody else is doing, which is like, let's do all this portaling and bring in all these guys through the portal. And it didn't really work out. So now he's just going to go in on guys with like huge upsides, and we're really going to see how it goes. Like, to me, Kentucky is the team that has the most volatility in the rankings. I could see them winning the league. I could see them being like 9th. Yeah. None of it would surprise me.
I think that's fair. I'm sold on this team just from that standpoint, like everything you mentioned, just kind of what they have roster wise. And this does feel like a Cal type team, whereas some of the ones previously, they're built much different than we've seen. We've been used to dubbing Cal like teams. They just were built different. And I think with this one, one of the things I think is blue ribbon. The thought that Cal's been saying, oh yeah, we're going to let this team shoot more threes. Well, I'll believe that when I see it. And I think offensively, I'll believe that they've evolved whenever I see it, because last year it just didn't happen. But I think there's a difference in that I feel like last year it was very obvious pretty early on that the pieces they had, specifically on the perimeter, just did not fit together with the way that they were trying to play. And I think now, though, you have a DJ Wagner who is just, a guy who can create anything he needs to create, and it's easy to say, or like he's Cal's type of guard when, Cal coached his dad, and, DeJuan Wagner was great, as we know, from Memphis and such. But it's like, it's still like having that guy like him, where now Antonio Reeves doesn't feel like a guy who's put in a position where it's like, all right, sorry, Antonio, like everybody knows you're getting the ball in this possession. Good luck. Like, good luck trying to, make plays and do everything you do, get open shots consistently. But because of what he has around him now, and of course, Justin Edwards, projected top pick, number 2 pick in the draft next year, at least. Yeah,
almost certain to be top 5. And if he has a good year, he'll probably be the top pick.
Yeah, like I said, someone asked me, I said, I absolutely make the argument that he's the SEC preseason player of the year. I'm like, he won't get voted that, but you could 100% make the argument, alongside Wade Taylor and such. But I think when you consider that, and that's where like even a Reed Shepherd, right? Like there are already lots of talk about him in terms of, again, we talk about dads. Like this is the Cal dad team. Like it's all right. Now you go back to Jeff Shepherd, which of course Cal didn't coach him back in the day.
That was Patino, right?
Yeah,
when he was
what,
still there.
96, 98.
Yeah, 96, 98, I think.
Yeah, but like it's funny because Reed Shepherd feels a lot like his dad, like someone who can just go out and make shots, and they need a guy like that. How many times we said, like in recent years, they need a guy who just go out and make shots. But he's a freshman, but still, there's a lot to like about this team. Now, the one thing I will say, and you kind of talked about the front court earlier, but it's an Aaron Bradshaw and a Ugonna Onyenso both having foot injuries to start the season for big man. Not ideal.
Those two are hurt, and Ivicic is still not cleared to play.
So good luck, Trey Mitchell. Like you're all alone. I mean, really, right? That's kind of what it feels like. And so,
they play Kansas too, second week of the season.
Yeah. So I mean, that's going to depend on a lot, and it's like you said earlier, it's foot injury to big guy. You always hesitate a little bit, but as long as they get those two guys back healthy, because I do think Onyenso will help them in spurts. I don't know how many minutes he plays, but he'll help them just like he did last year. I think in different spurts, just because of how he can block shots and stuff on defense. But Bradshaw's the guy they obviously need on the floor a lot, and
he's also a guy that can space the floor.
Yeah. And
rebounds well.
It's like, I'm not a Kentucky, like I'm not, I'm an unbiased professional here, except when it comes to Dennis Gates, but I want to see Kentucky. I think they can be so exciting offensively if Cal just let them. And if he does that, this team's going to be hard to beat, but it's still a wait and see, like always, I think, with them. So
I think that's the challenge. I do think figuring out exactly like if this model still works in this new era, and I think maybe another few years we'll see much more of like a focus on high school recruiting sort of return. Now that guys aren't able to play 7-8 years in college anymore, but COVID did kind of screw things up. It also messed up development time for a lot of young guys. So like freshmen were more erratic because they were behind in their development. So Texas A&M, I think, we haven't really spent a lot of time with. I don't really know that we need to spend a lot of time with them. They're going to be good.
It's the same team as last year, minus Dexter Dennis, and they've added a couple new players that are what I dub Buzz Williams guys. Like, why can I never remember the guy that comes from UIC? Jace Carter. That's it.
Carter.
Yes, Buzz Williams guy, top like 100%. So it's like take Dexter Dennis out. Think of the same team you saw last year. Which, don't get me wrong, Dexter Dennis played a huge role defensively and such, but it's the same team with the best player in the SEC coming back. So, yeah.
Let's take Kentucky out of it, because I think we both agree that like the volatility there. Who is the most likely to fall out of the top 4 out of these? If you want to include Alabama, I may not let you. So let's just go Tennessee.
How about we just narrow it to Tennessee, A&M,
Tennessee, Arkansas, A&M. I think that's probably good.
Arkansas.
Who's the most likely to not be in the top 4?
Arkansas, for all the reasons you mentioned earlier. I think that's, and it's fair. I mean, again, I'm high on them, but I think it's fair to list those reasons because, and two, I mean, it's just rinse and repeat. They start slow every year. Like it happens, and they put themselves in 1-5 last year, 0-3 the year before, 2-4 the year before that. Like in SEC play, they always start slow.
Yeah.
And so they could easily put themselves behind to where they're clawing back like they usually do. So,
best chance to make the Final Four.
I mean, and I know this is going to go against the
Is it also Arkansas?
Maybe. No, I'll do the unpopular pick. I will go Tennessee. Like I know everybody's gonna say Rick Barnes can't get them there and all this, but I really like the roster. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Like I think now let me put a caveat in there. To get there, they need Zakai Ziegler back at some point, and he needs to look like the old Zakai Ziegler. If they get that, then I mean, with Toby Awaka coming along, James coming back, Vescovi's back, Connect looks pretty good so far. They've got Freddie DeLeon, who I think is underrated.
They have fewer Serbians who are throwing.
Don't give me flagrants.
Elbows.
So that's how that always helps.
There you go. Positive.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that's very true. So, I'll still go with Tennessee. I get it. I mean, I completely get that the postseason success is what it is, and I know the offense has been frustrating, but man, I think last year it's like, I know they struggled down the stretch, but they still got to the Sweet 16. They dealt with injuries, like a lot of injuries, and they still got there. So I think this team is on paper is really good. So I'll go with Tennessee.
I'm going to set the over under at we'll go 8.5 for SEC teams in the NCAA tournament. Going under?
Easily.
So that would mean Texas A&M, Tennessee, Kentucky, Arkansas, Alabama, Florida.
Then I think it's pretty debatable after that. Like, I think Florida has to get there. And I'm not saying he's going to get fired, but like, I think they got to get there this year. So I think they will, even if it's a 10 seed, 11 seed or something.
Missouri?
I will give Dennis Gates the benefit of the doubt.
Okay.
Then, I mean, we're trying to find a spot for Auburn, Mississippi State.
Auburn. This is why I put it at 8.5, because there's a lot of teams that okay. So
someone
Auburn
asked me last week. I said 8.
You said 8.
Man, I think Jans is a great coach. And maybe, but like, I'm not overplaying this, right? Like, Toulouse Smith you can make the argument he's the best player in the league, like in terms of like impact.
In terms of value, yeah, you could probably make that. Yeah.
So if we're taking him out of the mix and we don't know when he's coming back. I mean, because remember, I think the wording was they're hopeful to get him back January to February.
Play. Yeah, which
I mean, I don't know, man. If you take him out of the mix, again, I think they still find a way to make the tournament, but because I don't know when he's coming back, they could easily get off to a terrible start in league play based on the schedule.
So you're saying like Bruce Pearl's going to miss the NCAA tournament?
No, I think I got to put them in.
You got to go to 9.
I mean,
it's either Bruce Pearl or Dennis Gates.
Yeah, I mean,
or Todd Golden.
Man,
you're going to go to 9.
I would put Auburn ahead of all those teams. So
really,
yeah, I think I would. So I think I would put Auburn right behind Alabama. So then it becomes the Florida, Missouri, Mississippi State, 2 out of the 3 go. And I think Florida will get there because they got Riley Kugel and they got everybody else I mentioned earlier. Then maybe it does come down to Missouri, Mississippi State. So I'll take the team that doesn't have their best player sidelined for an indefinite amount of time. Even though I think, I don't know, that's a tough one. Maybe you're right. Maybe they get 9 in. I don't know. So
hey, there have been some early bracket projections that does have the SEC at 9.
Really?
I would be surprised if they got 9.
Yeah, I don't see it. I think 8 at most, and I think it's kind of like last year. Whoever the 8 is,
I think the only way that they get 9 is if those like the bottom 4 are even worse than we think they are, and they take a lot of losses. Because that's one of those things. Is there's usually a team that's like on the 11 line, that's won 6 or 7 games. That's competitive. So is South Carolina going to go 1-17? Is Georgia going to go, 3-15? If that happens, then I think maybe you can get to 9. But that's the kind of stuff that has to happen. Is you have to have kind of like a clear marker of who the best teams are, and if let's say both Missouri and Mississippi State are both like 9-9, but they're fighting for 8-9 in the league, then they're probably going to go 9 teams.
Because it's like if you just go by elite teams, how many can't 100%, which you never be 100%, but if you don't account for a significant injury, how many teams would just be stunned? Or not, maybe there's a better way. How many teams are just so to the point where that's an elite team, they're not dropping considerably, right? They're always going to be. I think it's Tennessee, and I guess it's probably take your pick either of A&M or Arkansas, which I know you wouldn't, but maybe it's Kentucky. So maybe 3 teams. I think
the only team, and really you can say that the only team that I don't see falling out of the top 4 is maybe Tennessee. I could see a scenario where Texas A&M comes back to earth a little bit and plays, maybe closer to their median than I think what they're playing the last 2 months. They're one of the 15 best teams in the country. And
was it 2019? That was the year you had 5 SEC teams that were top 5 seeds: Kentucky, Tennessee, LSU, Mississippi State, Auburn. Because you had Auburn wound up winning 30 games, Tennessee won 31, Kentucky won 30, LSU won 28.
That was your Mississippi State lost their 5-12 game, right?
Liberty, yeah. I just don't. It's possible. I think this year you could have that clear, all 5 of those: Tennessee, Arkansas, Kentucky, A&M, Alabama, maybe Auburn, Florida, whoever. I could see that scenario where there's just a hard cutoff with the top 5, but yet all 5 are top 5 seeds or higher.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's that, how you said, it's the middle that you just could be remarkably average, and the bottom could just be bad. And so, I could see that split potentially.
Yeah. Looking nationally, do you have a favorite for the team to hang a banner after this year?
Well, I can't say Kansas. So,
you can.
I can't. I can't.
I don't love the way that they looked against Illinois. I know, Bill Self is probably not going to be running out his best stuff, but I'm also not a huge, believer that, even as good as Hunter Dickinson is, I don't necessarily think that he's the player of the year caliber kind of guy. So I'm kind of curious to see, if anyone from the Big Ten can actually do it, as Purdue can actually get to a Final Four. I'd like it for Matt Painter. I think, Painter's a great coach. Yeah. But I don't, maybe it's the Missouri fan in me. I just can't bring myself to think that, that Kansas roster is as fireproof as a lot of people think it is.
I'm still pretty high on UConn, even though, they've got obviously guys coming back, got to replace, guys, of course, but I'm a Hurley guy, man. I just think the way he coaches, I don't see them. I think they're going to be really good. So I could even put them up there, even with what they have to replace. But I think Duke, everybody has their opinions on Duke.
Has a lot of talent. A lot.
They are loaded. If you had to ask me, right,
they probably have 8 guys who are going to play in the NBA.
If I had to pick one team right now where they're hey, all your money, everything is on the line, you have to get this right, I'd pick Duke. So, I just think of talent.
I could see that. There are also they're a younger-ish team who bring a lot of guys back, and they started really kind of figuring things out like late in the season. Then they took a hard lesson when they played Tennessee. So, I think that's all stuff that you can kind of see them learn from. And I mean, I think the ACC is also kind of down, so they're going to win a lot of games. I think Filipowski's probably already a star. Does Tyrese Proctor take a star turn? Jeremy Roach is a great player, but I think if Proctor turns into the star that they think he's going to be, then you might have the best backcourt in the country.
And they did shoot it real well last year, and I think that's something else too. I think they'll be better this year.
Better at shooting the basketball. Shooting is important, Blake.
Yes. So, I'll take a chance on Duke. It's like Purdue, I think, is another one. You mentioned them a second ago, but like it's kind of that same thing. It just kind of holds you back because you saw what you saw and how it ended, and like it's just So
did you look at Ken Palm's preseason rankings and think that the algorithm was on some sort of substance?
I actually just pulled it up here a few minutes ago. I think it's the first time I've actually looked at the top. Like I've looked at the SEC.
Just pull up the SEC conference and look at the rankings that some of these teams have, and like South Carolina was top 70. Like,
yeah, I saw that, and I saw Ole Miss last. I was like, I'm not buying that, because I just don't see that happening.
And again, like, I don't know what he inputs into, because a lot of people refer to this as Ken Pom. This is Ken Pomeroy's algorithm. So he inputs stuff into the algorithm, and this is what it spits out. It's the same thing with Bill Connolly. Everybody loves to complain to Bill that he hates their team. No. Bill doesn't. The algorithm does. So, like how do you factor? Like, I can't imagine a world in which Chris Beard will field the 106th best defense in the country.
No, I don't think so.
Like,
I don't see it. Like that's the thing. Like, to me, Ole Miss is like the ultimate sleeper team. Like, if we turn this back to the SEC, maybe even nationally, because it's the guy.
I've long been a Matthew Morrell guy too. Like, I don't think that Kermit failed because he didn't have talent on his roster. I thought that roster last year was probably one of Ole Miss's most talented rosters.
Yeah,
they stunk, but it wasn't because they didn't have talent. And I think we all think that Kermit Davis is a good basketball coach, but for whatever reason, he could not put it together.
I mean, look, injuries were part of it. But like every year they're battling injuries, but now it is like, that's the thing. If you just gave me one of a Brandon Murray and Moussa Cisse, which I think Murray would be, and not to knock, this is not a knock on Cisse, it's just Murray, I think, is what they need from a scoring standpoint. If you just gave me one of those guys, I mean, with everything else that they have there, and just expecting Beard to get the most out of what he has, because he does it everywhere he goes. I mean, they had one of the better off seasons, I think, of anybody in terms of like reloading the roster with talent. And so adding bringing Morrell back, Brakefield, those guys, I mean, So, I mean, obviously Sharp is going to play, but that's where, like, if you have a Sharp and a Cisse, what do you do if you're the opposing team? I think Ole Miss is – people thought I was crazy early in the summer when I said I'd put them in the top 5 in the league if they have everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to do that now, but I could see it. If they had everybody, I think they could be a top 5 team. So
I think I'm also rooting a little bit against that happening. Mainly because I don't like that they went and hired Beard like fresh off everything that happened. I think that's just an ugly look. I don't know. Like, it just feels kind of gross, but it is the SEC, and we just brought Hugh Freeze back. So, like,
well, look, and Kermit, one of the most well-respected guys out there too. And it's like, you go from that, which again, the success wasn't there from a winning standpoint, but it is like a very just based on, the situation that happened with Beard, just the optics are just completely different. Yeah. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, they also fired, their all-time winningest coach, and then hired a guy who is basically the same guy, and how he builds a roster. But I've said that before, and it does make you question the decision making by a lot of those in leadership and the athletics department down there.
Sure, the AK coach is in the SEC again, right? Before he retires. Surely.
You think? I mean,
I know he's a UAB alma mater. I get it, but if I was an SEC school that had an opening soon, I'd give him a call.
Yeah. I think it depends on the school. I don't know. I don't know that anybody's going to be coming open anytime soon. Vandy, maybe.
We'll see.
I think
there's a couple candidates going into this season, depending on how bad things are. But. Yeah.
Well, Stackhouse, I think, was trying to get the Raptors job last summer. And I think maybe thought he had it until it didn't. Who else you got? Maybe LSU, South Carolina?
Yeah, like I was going to say, I think if LSU and South Carolina just are 3-win, 2-win, 4-win types, I think, and here's why I'd say that. I like both guys. Thought they both could potentially get SEC jobs when they were out there, but I think it's just the nature of the transfer portal now, right? And it's people see how quickly you can flip your roster and how quickly you can have success. It's not the 3-year wait anymore. And so, but I don't know either. I mean, I don't know how much South Carolina.
Well, you also have to have buy-in from your collectives to build the type of roster that, the fans want. And if that doesn't exist, it doesn't matter how good your coach is. A lot of the best players are going to where they're going to get paid. So Lamont Paris could be the greatest coach in the SEC, but if you don't have players who can stack up, it's not going to matter. Well, we're way past time. I know this is a shock.
We said we were not going to do this time, and
we actually last year we had to do 2 pods, if you remember correctly. So we're gonna keep it to 1. It is Georgia week for a lot of Mizzou football fans, so I'm sure they're ready to get on to before the box score and all that kind of stuff with Nate and BK. So I always point in the wrong direction because it's this way. Blake, you are still over at Southeastern 14. The name may be changing after this upcoming season. Subscribe to Blake's channel. I'll have Levi drop a link in the comments of this post. You can subscribe. Doing a lot of good content. Anything you want to plug over there?
Yeah, you can check everything out over there. Obviously, we do football first and foremost. You guys know me as the basketball guy, but obviously I do a lot of football stuff over there now. Just kind of pushing everything out that we do. And so, yeah, check out all of our football stuff. We'll have a lot of stuff this week, obviously, on Georgia, Missouri as well, from that standpoint. And as I teased earlier, our preseason power rankings, which you already know pretty much all of them based on me giving them out for free here. So congratulations. You guys get them first. We'll have those up this week on the channel. And then, of course, we will start our regular daily SEC basketball coverage starting next week. So find it all there. And you can follow me on Twitter, X, when I decide to get on there, which is pretty rare at this point, other than just a retweet at the Blake Lovell.
Yeah, and soon Blue Sky too, right? I sent you that invite code. So
yeah, I've got that. So you can follow me there as well. Whenever I decide to join Sam and everyone else on there. So
I don't tweet, not tweet, post, whatever it is.
What do you even call it?
Either these days, I don't know. I could get talked into it. Probably if the traffic picks up. It's a little politics heavy at the moment. I think mostly because it's a lot of journalists and political writers who flee Twitter. So you can follow him. at both Twitter and Blue Sky, apparently. But definitely go subscribe to Southeastern 14. It's worth it. There's a lot of great content there. Blake, always a pleasure, man. Thanks for taking the time, an extensive amount of time to hang out with me tonight. And we'll catch up with you soon.
You got it, my friend. Thanks, Sam. And
again, I'd like to say thank you to Blake for joining me. You can follow him on Twitter, at the Blake Lovell. Do that. Subscribe to Southeastern 14. Also, if you have not yet, subscribe here. We are looking for all the subscribers that we can get. The more subscribers we get, the more people get to see this stuff, and the more people that will want to talk about Mizzou basketball, which is what we all want. Thanks everybody for tuning in. As we get into the season, you're going to start seeing us weekly. So we'll be back next week with more episodes of Dive Cuts.